at a certain point landed me in the realm of digital rights and tech and social justice. So I don't have a formal background in tech, but I've learned a ton through collaborating with colleagues and partners and through working in very mixed teams in terms of everyone's skills and knowledge, which I highly recommend. I think a good mix of skills and backgrounds can really strengthen the work that you're doing, and also allow you to expand your own skills and knowledge, which I feel I have very much benefited from. I'll hand over to Lesedi to introduce himself.
Thanks, Helen. Hi, everyone. My name is Lesedi. So yeah, I work alongside with Helen and Kathy. I work as the technical engagement coordinator at the Engine Room. So I do have originally a background in tech and informatics, and I kind of came to this space through originally a strong interest in using tech and data for social good. I originally went off on my own after school and harmoniously found the Engine Room about 9 years ago. I have a strong interest in sort of different sectors from health, democracy, and governance, and how data and tech can strengthen advocacy in those sectors. And currently I work a lot with through our pro bono support programs, which we'll elaborate on a bit more. And so I have a lot of conversations with sort of external partners globally who we support through our pro bono data and tech support. So excited to chat with everyone today. And yeah, I'll pass the baton, I think, to Kathy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Lesedi. My name is Kathy. I am based in New York, originally from Costa Rica. I have been at the Engine Room for about 4 years now-ish. Primarily working as a tech team lead, providing support to different organizations with all their tech and data heavy projects. So that can be, platform recommendations or recommendations around data management. And my background is originally in international aid, which kind of more or less the same thing. And then I'm a self-taught coder, data science person. So all sorts of paths. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Now we're going to transition into our keynote talk. I think Lesedi was going to give that. Is that right?
Yes. If you just give me 1 second, I'll just share our presentation. Yeah, let me know if you can see the slides. Okay, great. All right. So hey, everyone. Yeah, so today, I think there's a bit of background noise there. Cool. So today we'll be presenting and chatting about a specific project that we worked on with another partner. And so I guess the title, yeah. So basically we'll be going through how we supported an organization to use data and technology for social justice. So again, just a bit of background on us again. So we are a nonprofit organization. We are a distributed team, so we work primarily virtually. And yeah, we're distributed across different continents in Africa, Europe, and Latin America as well. So I touched on a bit briefly about our or pro bono or no fee support programs. So we have a couple of different streams that we sort of provide and engage with partners globally. I work primarily on our light touch support, which is rapid data and tech support. And we also do in-depth engagement through our Matchbox support program. So yeah, going into the topic of today. So specifically, we'll be speaking about how we used a tool called Uwazi to build and publish a database documenting police violence. So a bit of background. So in 2020, we originally partnered with an organization in Argentina called CELS, Centro de Estudios Legales y Sociales. We engaged with them actually through our Matchbox program. So we embarked upon a year-long project with them. And this project was basically for us to work with them in a way for them to improve the way that they manage the data that they're collecting around police violence in Argentina. So one of their core goals is to document and tell stories about police violence in Argentina, particularly in Buenos Aires and surrounding areas. And the project that we worked from our side was to kind of take on the data and tech needs and sort of find ways for them to incorporate solutions and move towards a vision of improving the way that they manage their data internally to be able to use it more efficiently and effectively for advocacy and storytelling. So a bit about the project itself. When we came on board, Sales basically told us that they were previously using another internal database. So they were already collecting data on police violence through different mechanisms, through the newspaper, through online searches and research. So they're already doing a lot of this work, but they wanted to find a way to be able to make it much easier for them to be able to manage this data, to analyze it, and to be able to tell stories from it. So they were using a custom database from, I think it was over 10 years old. So it was very difficult for them to work with. I believe it was a Microsoft Access database that they were using. So they had it actually running in their offices. But they had a vision to kind of upgrade and to find a platform that they could use for their internal data management, as well as for them to be able to publish this data externally to increase awareness within the communities that they work with, and to also use it for advocacy in terms of the police violence that they were advocating against. On their original platform, they had over 12,000 cases of police violence documented. So basically, this was the data that we were going to work with as we moved with them to implementing a new tool to be able to manage this data. So the first step was for us to have conversations with the team. So we actually worked with them on the ground to figure out what were the key requirements and needs. So what were they actually looking for in terms of a new tool to manage this data? So we went through a process of interviews with the team on the ground, doing a bit of research on looking at their documentation, and also kind of hands-on exercises with them to get a good feel of what they were actually looking for. And this is a process that we follow with our partners in general, is kind of a needs-based assessment to try and figure out what does the partner actually need. And we approach this from that lens first, instead of just looking at maybe a tool and then just trying to kind of fit the tool into the problem. And we identified sort of key requirements. So requirements means this is what specifically they were looking for for the new tool that they would like to use for their data. So this list goes through, firstly, open source. So they were looking for a tool that they could actually, was open. That means it could be changed and tailored to their needs. So the code itself, someone could actually go into the code and tailor it and customize it for their specific needs. Secondly, they wanted to be able to host the tool internally in their offices. So they have some infrastructure that they have set up. They have a server that they wanted to be able to host the tool on. And this was important in terms of the ownership and the security. So they wanted to feel sort of aligned in terms of having full ownership for this data and having it in-house for them to be able to manage as well. Thirdly, it was really important for them to be able to have an easy way to search for different cases. So we collaboratively developed a way for them to tag the documentation that they were going to add to the tool. And they will also make it easy for various members across the team to, search by keywords or specific tags, so that searchability was very user-friendly on the new tool. And then we also wanted to make sure that moving forward in the long term, that there was an easy way for team members. So they have data entry, they have researchers who are constantly adding and updating new cases on the platform. So it was very important for them to be able to have a mechanism for them to be able to easily do that from the front end. So from the user interface side of the tool. So once we came up with these requirements, we went through a process of doing a bit of research, looking back on our previous experience and knowledge of different tools. And we came to Uwazi, which is an open source tool that's developed by Huradox specifically for the human rights sector. It focuses primarily on publishing and managing human rights documentation. So it is available for free of use. You can go to the Huradox website and actually download the tool, set it up yourself, and then start to use it. So yeah, it's free and openly available for folks in the sector to use. So once we chose the tool, we had to then figure out, we set up the tool. The key question was how we're going to get all this information across from their old tool to the new one. So one of the key activities that we did with them was to export the information or the data, the 12,000 cases from the old tool. We had to do a bit of data wrangling, which means basically we had to clean the data, restructure it so Uwazi has a specific structure. So that did require some technical expertise for it to be able to be imported into the new Uwazi tool. And then at the end of that process, we were able to import the 12,000 cases from their old tool to the Uwazi that they would be moving forward with as well. Once that was done, we then, another requirement was for them to be able to publish stories in a public space. So we worked with them to look for and hire a designer and a developer to create a platform where they could actually publish data stories about cases for police violence. And then finally, we then connected the actual database. So this means Uwazi, which hosts the information, was connected to the public website. So Violencia Policial is the name of the public website that publishes those stories of police violence in Argentina. So I actually wanted to give a bit of a demo of the public website. So if I just change my tab, I just wanted to share that. If you give me 1 second, I'll switch over. For some reason, it's not letting me share. It's not letting me share the website. Wonder why. Sorry about that. Okay. Sorry about that. For some reason, it's telling me it's failing to share that screen. But yeah, I think we can still go back to this. And then I will continue with the presentation. Yeah, so just wanted to see if, can you see my slides again? Yeah, okay. So the link is there actually. So if you'd actually like to browse the website, you can, and I think we'll share these slides as well, so you can take a look at the link if you'd like to browse through and see how the data was actually displayed on that website. So yeah, that is the public-facing website, which came out of the work that we did with them. But yeah, so what we learned from this project, so quite a few kind of key takeaways that came out of this work. So moving data takes much more time than what we expected, and I think overall for these kinds of projects. So it's an iterative process, and there's a lot of trial and error. So trying to figure out, what works can take a bit of time. So definitely, it's important to budget for that time when working with large amounts of data. We also saw that it was essential for us to have documentation. So documenting, for example, the roles and who has, for example, access to data in the team, and also the knowledge of how we're, for example, working with the tool or the data, especially, for example, we experienced a couple of changes in the team. So having that documentation to transfer knowledge to new team members is really important to kind of keep momentum in the project as well. Also having backup. So during, for example, when we moved the data, if something went wrong, we had a backup, so we could always go back and revert and then kind of redo, for example, the import into the tool in case something went wrong. So having backups is essential to maintaining sort of consistency in the data. Also understanding the needs in terms of choosing the infrastructure for the tool. So in terms of, what kind of skills and capacity are on the team, especially since this tool will be hosted by the organization. So understanding who has the capacity, what is their infrastructure to be able to host the tool in the long term. And yeah, I think as I mentioned in the first point, working with data does require a lot of care, a lot of patience, and many, many sort of repetitive iteration cycles before you can get it just right. And yeah, lastly, the impact. So one of the motivating factors from this project was that now that they had a tool that they could more easily manage, work with the data and publish stories, it kind of motivated them to do more research around this topic. And as a result of this increased research, more than 60 examples of this research were done and uploaded onto the new platform, the new tool. And yeah, the core goal of this project was to make data more accessible, manageable, and easier to maintain, which we achieved through this work with cells. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time. And yeah, I think I'll pass it back to Daniel. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that case study, Lesedi. Really fascinating highlight of your work. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to read off some questions that I have for you, 3, and whoever feels like they're most qualified or most interested in answering the question can just hop right in. So recent events have really highlighted the impact that tech and its applications can have on a society. Things like artificial intelligence and social media very readily come to mind. But guiding that potential towards positive ends is much more challenging. What are a few things you would say to young leaders that will help them in their journey towards navigating the realm of tech for social impact?
I can start, I guess. So thank you for the question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is, I think, thinking about the passion that you have for technology. Well, actually, the issue itself. I think thinking clearly about the issue that you're trying to solve is the first, I think, approach to take. We've seen a lot of organizations and groups think technology first, which we don't believe is the right approach. So finding ways where the issue itself is the core behind the goals, and then figuring out and doing research, having conversations with experts to figure out, what kind of data and tech can actually fit into the challenges that you're trying to solve. So I think that lens is really important for folks who are leading on these kind of ideas. Yeah, Helen, Kathy, do you have any other thoughts for that?
Yeah, everything Lesedi said, and probably for me too, and I think this is very difficult. It's also realizing that it's the world we also live in. Understanding that we might build a tool and it might seem like it's for someone else, but eventually, or for some other use, but eventually that tech might be used for other various purposes. So yeah, understanding that in creating these tools and creating this technology, we're also creating the world we live in. So being mindful of that.
All right, if that's everything, we'll move on to the next question. Current civil society seems to not fully understand the impact and the scope that technology has on everyday politics and political events. How do we identify the gaps between our public response to advancements in technology and address those within the context of tech for social impact and tech for social justice?
I'll give this a go. This is a very broad question, and I'm not sure I have any easy answers for it. But I think a good start that I would encourage is just to follow people's work who are working on in this area. There's a lot of great organizations looking at AI, for example, and just kind of teasing apart the various impacts that AI can have on society in both good and harmful ways. And a lot of this is very complex and very broad. And so I found in my own learning, just following the right voices and learning through them, keeping up with the conversation through their eyes, and yeah, just because I've mentioned AI, there's some groups that I've found useful to follow are the DARE Institute and the Algorithmic Justice League, and all the individuals working within those organizations are also worth following on LinkedIn. Just keeping up with conversations that enable you to start thinking critically about all of these issues and to kind of imagine more easily the impacts that technology has on various aspects of society, so that you can bring that into your own work as well.
And maybe to piggyback off of that question, do you have any recommendations for young leaders who are trying to develop a dialogue between themselves or the people who are developing advancements in technology and the communities that those technologies and those advances in technologies will be impacting and affecting?
I can start. I think one of the big ones is communication skills. It seems like it's like a given. But I think one of the things that we've learned is people who work in technology would communicate in a certain way. Then other non-tech people communicate in another way. So it's about, being able to find that common ground and like the language that you use, making sure that it sounds like it's like something simplistic, but like being able to explain to a community what the technology is about and what risks it can bring, how it works, all these things is like so huge. So being able to communicate in a way that like others also understand and finding common ground, I think, is huge.
I think also like seeking out other organizations working on similar projects or peer organizations who might have done similar work can really help. So really seeking out people who've been working on the issues that you are interested in working in, to learn from their experiences as well, to find out what's worked, what doesn't. And, every context is different. So it's very important to take your specific context into account. And the way to do that is by getting into that context and figuring out what the people in that context think about things, what they need. Really just getting to know what you're dealing with.
Yeah, just to add on a bit, I also think, just piggybacking off Helen's point about context, I think it's important to kind of bridge the gap of understanding of, for example, certain tools can work well in certain contexts, but not others, and to be able to understand the challenges that for example, implementing a certain kind of technology, let's say in a rural setting versus in an urban setting, is completely different based upon access to certain kinds of infrastructure, the communities themselves, how will it impact them, and how perhaps will they be actually accessing this technology. For example, they may not have strong internet, they may be just accessing information through their mobile phones. So taking these factors into consideration is really important, I think, especially when communicating with developers who may not have experience or knowledge in those contexts, when thinking about building or rolling out these kind of tools.
And that was something you had spoken to earlier, where maybe a lot of organizations consider a tech first approach to be correct, and your organization doesn't believe that that's correct. Could you elaborate a bit more on why that is, and why do you think that's important in this context?
Yeah, I'll start. I think firstly, we believe that there isn't a one size fits all solution to a lot of these challenges. I think a lot of tech is developed and approached in that way. So we definitely go needs first. So we always explore needs and challenges first. I think the ecosystem and the scope of tech is really broad, but within the civil society space, there isn't as much obviously resources as in private industry. So I think it's important for us to be able to really tailor the way that tech is used. I think the harms as well are really important to understand. Certain kinds of tech can introduce actually harm. Sometimes technology isn't always the answer. So it's not just you throw tech at the problem and it magically solves the problem. So I think that's definitely one of our strong sort of core ways that we have these conversations, and we speak to partners who are actually interested in tech. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for answering my questions. We're going to be moving into our open Q&A section now. Any fellow who has a question, I'd like you now to feel free to put it into the chat box, and I will call on you, and you'll have the opportunity to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, where you're calling in from, what your name is, and ask your question.
Hi, Daniel. This is James. Perhaps as you wait for questions from fellows, and fellows, please feel free to either raise your hands or type in the chat box. Perhaps I can just ask a question and direct it to the tech-focused speakers. Mine is more on the career side, I think. In the world currently, when you think about tech and a career in tech, you're thinking, a career in big tech, Meta, Google, etc. But you guys did the tech. You have the technical background, but you went into careers of impact. I'm curious whether you see that as a trade-off in terms of, you could have had what we maybe call a big time tech career, but you went into a space where your impact is probably felt more on a day-to-day, perhaps at a trade-off, maybe. Do you see that as, how do you ever think of that as a either or? And is it something that, for the emerging technologists in the room right now, who are maybe grappling with that, that sort of mental tug of war in terms of their career aspiration, what would you say to them?
I can go first. Yeah, it's definitely hard to answer. I think it depends on what drives you. I know personally for me, one of the stories that I often use is if you've ever watched the Apollo 13 movie, where they have to put together a filter with like boxes and whatever they could find in the office. Look for that movie if you haven't seen it already. That's the kind of stuff that I love to do. I love being able to like really solve complex problems, have restrictions, etc. So for example, even I've worked at a startup, and I wasn't as keen to do things when it was just like, we have a budget for this, we have a budget for that, we have unlimited resources to work in these things. I really do like to solve like complex problems. So while there is probably like certain things that you're giving up, some of which we all know, the other things that you're like definitely getting are just you're able to work, and obviously in low resource environments or with low resources in general. And it really like helps you think outside the box, and do things in situations that many people would never have to think about.
Yeah, I think, quite similar to Kathy. I think the trade-offs, perhaps, at a personal level, I think, it is. I think it is about the passion and, what interests you in terms of, if you, have a strong leaning or interest in social justice or, bettering society. And for example, you have the skills or you've acquired technical skills to do that. And, that is rewarding. I can say that from my personal perspective, I also worked in a private company for about 2 years before, going to the civil society space. And I didn't have sort of a strong attachment to, for me, what was kind of not having a strong purpose towards the work that I was doing. Whereas when I moved to like social justice, I could see and speak to directly the people that, the work that I was doing was impacting, at a community level, or, even today, from day to day, even simple sort of ways or what we would think or take for granted as simple kind of advice or solutions, they really go a long way. And for me at a personal level, that's really rewarding, to see change, and to kind of, have a personal attachment to seeing that change within society, I think through perhaps the, the skills and the knowledge that I'm able to share.
I think also, so from someone who was never in line for a very high paid tech job, because I don't have that tech background, there are still a lot of jobs in the social justice sector and the nonprofit sector for tech people. And generally those jobs are decently paid, especially when you're comparing it to a lot of the other jobs in that sector. So if you are interested in working in this area, I wouldn't be too worried about not finding jobs. Or, I mean, yes, you can earn a lot more money in the corporate sector, but also you can probably do all right in this sector. There's also academia as an option. I don't know if anyone is interested in this, but there's academics working on tech and society issues and digital security issues, and there's that whole stream as well. Also, maybe not a massive money area, but it's an option.
All right, we have our first set of questions from our fellows. I have a question from Dhruv relating to the project that Lesedi was sharing. It's a technical question. What is your interpretation of creating a decentralized framework for handling data? And did that idea ever occur to you?
So I think specifically for this project, we didn't reach a stage where we would have that conversation around, I guess, decentralizing. I'm just making an assumption that means sort of maybe having distributed, let's say, centers for where the data would be available. I hope I'm understanding the question correctly. So I think because the data was primarily being researched, analyzed by one organization, and I think for the data sharing itself, for example, perhaps there was a mechanism or agreements for cells to be able to share analyzed data, with other partners. And I think we've had conversations through other tech in terms of decentralization. We've had conversations, I think, about for experimenting with chat. I think there's a tool called Matrix where we wanted to come up with a decentralized mechanism, self-hosted way to be able to communicate with other organizations securely. So I think it is a very interesting approach. I think that it's kind of can add to sort of the self-reliance part of organizations who want to be able to share and distribute knowledge. But I think it does take quite a bit of work and expertise to understand how to set up these decentralized systems. So I hope that answers the question.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question comes from Anya Hassanad. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, introduce yourself, I'll read off the question. I'd like to know if there are any basic technology and data tools, like apps, courses, etc., that you recommend that could serve as a starting point for people who don't have a background in technology and data science in order to enhance their social work and their social impact.
This is a great question. I think it depends on what your goal is. So I think there's a lot you can learn about tech without actually learning to code, which I think is sometimes where you think you need to start, is I have to take a coding course or a course in data science. And it's great, I think, to get a little bit of experience when it comes to coding, but you don't necessarily need to go deep into that to be able to work with tech in order to be able to work with technologists and manage tech projects. There's a collaborative aspect that if you learn how to kind of collaborate in that way, depending on what your goals are, that might be enough. So yeah, it really depends on, I would say, what exactly you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to build sort of websites that display data in visual ways, then you might want to learn about maybe a little bit of HTML, learn a bit about data visualization tools, for example. There's many routes you can take without going through a coding bootcamp. There's also I've seen quite a few introductions to what is code, what is AI in the media in recent years. So look out for that stuff. It can be quite useful to get an overview of a certain area that you're interested in.
Yeah, big plus one to that. I think probably the one thing that I learned that I'll pass on to you all, don't get stuck in the training and the tutorials and all these things, because you can really do those forever. one of the things that I did, I just, for example, Catch a Fire in the US, I believe. They have quite a lot of organizations that just need help in different ways. But you can definitely find them like in your communities, things like that. So just like jumping in, you know, if you don't feel comfortable building an entire site, find someone that could do it with you, that could be your mentor. But definitely jumping in, not staying in the tutorial world for too long, because I'll be honest, I'm definitely one to do that. And then just jumping in with a lot of places that like, you know, like Helen mentioned, there's a lot of conversations around NLP and AI. Jump into communities that are talking about it, have conversations with people, find projects that you can volunteer on. And that's a great way to kind of build the skills. And sometimes that's even stronger than doing it.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question comes from Sajwal Ahmed from the Institute of Applied Science and Technology in Pakistan. He has a question about the use of technology and social impact. And he wants to know how leaders in tech can identify when technology solutions are not the answer for the problem at hand, so they can move away from taking that approach to the problem towards ones that would be more effective for that case.
Oh, Helen, go ahead. I might start with to a point that I previously mentioned, where perhaps when thinking about tech, maybe when you potentially identify that tech may introduce more harm to a specific issue or project. For example, one good example is if maybe you're working with a lot of sensitive information and you don't necessarily are not super comfortable with how to secure or maintain privacy of this information, you may be actually increasing or introducing a new risk to exposing, for example, people or subjects in the data. So I would say that's probably one indicator where maybe if it causes more harm or introduces new risks to a specific issue or topic, that would be a good point to pause or rethink the use of technology, or could just be that specific technology, and maybe you might need to just kind of pivot and kind of rethink the approach, or looking for another solution. So yeah, that's my first thought on that. I think that's a big one. Yeah. If Helen or Kathy actually had another thought. Also, I think in terms of capacity and resources, sometimes tech can be costly, not only financially, but in terms of what it is required to run a tool. So if the capacity or the resources maybe at this specific moment are not there, I think that's maybe another moment to pause. You don't want to introduce a new tool that sucks up all the resources and you don't have maybe enough human capacity or other resources to continue with the other important work that you're doing. So I think that's a big factor to consider as well. Yeah, around when to use tech.
I think also there's a fair amount that can be avoided in terms of doing harm or identifying harm if you've really done a lot of research and thought beforehand. So trying to run through, if you've got an idea for a tool, trying to run through who might be badly affected by this, or who might this not work for, or which groups am I not taking into account when I'm thinking about the users of these tools. What tools are those people using already? What are their capacities? So just kind of thinking through all that, what could go wrong is an excellent question to ask. And then the second thing is very simple, but sometimes it doesn't always get taken on, but just listening and asking questions and listening to what the users of your tools are telling you in terms of what's going wrong. Seeking out that feedback and not just waiting for it to come to you. So yeah, like maybe a more active type of listening to see how it's going for people.
Our next question comes from the Millennium Fellowship team. They'd like to know what challenges you've all faced organizationally as the engine room has developed, and what lessons you've learned from that you can share with young people trying to build their own social impact organizations.
I could take a first stab. I mean, I think, and this would apply to any organization that does tech, tech is constantly evolving, and it's really hard to keep up and do the work, like write the reports and read the articles and read the new papers on whatever new thing has come out. I think, I mean, this one we focus less on that. But like, for example, like the world was crazy about Bitcoin, like just last year, and like all these things that could happen. And then NFTs came out, and then now it's NLP, and that's the new big thing. So it's, I guess, one is keeping up with everything. And because of that, it's like, because it's so difficult, it's like really important to stay focused and know what you're about, and not constantly chase like the new tech thing that seems cool. Yeah, so like if you're, if you're working on one specific thing, it's okay to like branch out and like look outside the box, but be mindful to not always chase the new cool thing.
Yeah, I might add, I think for let's say a new or young organization, I actually joined the engine room when it was still smaller team. I think it's really important to identify, perhaps as you grow, it is hard to find the right people, but I think people share the passion. And yeah, I think, especially I think when the organization goes through kind of those ups and downs, I think the passion kind of helps everyone stick together and kind of ride those waves. And I think it's not always, I think, about maybe the most, I guess, if you're looking for someone with a particular position, yeah, I think having those relationships and connections of, the people who actually share the vision of what you're trying to do, is super important. And that it's not always necessarily just about, do they actually just have the skills to do the job? But I think for a small organization, people will do a lot of different things, as you grow. So I think, having that binding factor of, the vision, the passion is really important, and identifying those people, I think is key to being sustainable, I think. Yeah.
I think also for nonprofits, you always have to contend with funding. So figuring out how to keep sustainable funding, and, funders have changing agendas as well. So keeping up with that and kind of aligning your mission with where the money is coming from is also a challenge, with something to keep in mind.
Our next question is from Ani Chindima Chinwendu from the University of Calabar, Nigeria. What were some of the challenges that you faced that hindered the growth of your organization, and how did you overcome them? What do you think the best way is, in terms of organizational structure, to set yourselves up to socially impact our community?
This is such a contextual question, I would say. My main answer for all of that would be, it depends. I think in terms of growing our organization, that was never really a big goal. So it's been pretty steady, reached a certain point, and it's gone through fluctuations, but it hasn't been sort of just a expand. Yeah, in terms of how it's structured, I mean, we've been experimenting with different structures. Recently, there've been a few different, waves. It depends on how many people are in your organization, depends what everyone's jobs are, depends on how the work is organized. So I would say, yeah, it's useful to learn about the options available, but then really tailor it to what you have in front of you and what you want to do.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for all your questions, and thanks so much to the panel for answering them. We're going to be moving into the end of this webinar. I'd like to invite each of our panelists to share closing remarks for about 2 minutes each, and then we'll start to wrap things up.
I guess I can start. So I just wanted to thank everyone, and yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I was very intrigued by the questions, and I'm very excited to see the passion of all the members to social change, social justice, and I think overall, for me personally, tech and data is exciting, and it's great to see the curiosity from, I would assume, a lot of younger folks who are figuring out ways of, making a change. And yeah, I hope what we shared today was somewhat helpful and insightful. And yeah, I guess our door is open. So we're always happy to continue these conversations at our organization and to speak to more folks. So yeah, thank you very much. And I can pass the baton to Helen.
Yeah, just to say the same thing as Lesedi. Thanks everyone for coming and for asking such great questions. I encourage everyone to noodle around a bit, explore our website. We've got quite a lot of resources. We try and publish what we learn, try and publish what we're doing. So quite a lot of our learnings and kind of guidance that we come up with from our experiences are on there. We will be launching a redesign of the website soon. It's that's in progress. So maybe come back in a few months so you can see the new design, which has a filtering function on all our resources. Yeah, I would say also just when you're working with social justice and tech and data, just make sure to keep the social justice part first and then see how tech and data can make your work easier or enhance what you're doing. So put your goals first and then see how tech can enhance those rather than putting the tech first.
Yeah, thanks both. Plus one to all the things that everyone said. But yeah, I'd probably also add, like, as I mentioned, there's so many things to solve, so many really complex problems to solve, or at least, find ways to mitigate. So yeah, do what you can. Remember that, like, a lot of the things are, for example, Google working is contingent on, like, us having good infrastructure and, like, people being able to use it, being healthy enough to use it. So, we still have to also solve more complex problems. And yeah, definitely be curious. There's always things to learn. Yeah, it's the main thing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Everybody, you can find more about the Engine Room at www.theengineroom.org. We have 2 more webinars coming up next week on Wednesday and Friday. You'll be able to see more details about those in emails that will be coming shortly. Kate Cummings will be talking on Wednesday, and Torby Norman will be talking on Friday. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. I've been Daniel Chedekjian. This has been the Millennium Fellowship Global Webinar. Thanks for your time.